Hey, it's Joe Hage, and I am here with trusted friends and guests, Jose Bohorquez, pronounced properly, and Jorg Lorscheider, also pronounced properly. When you're a moderator like this
That's
is
yeah.
part of the gig. Today, we are going to have a mono versus mono debate on to 1345 or not to 1345. And in this corner is Jose Bohorquez. He is the founder and president of Bold Type Product Development. They specialize in connected wireless medical devices. He is a client of mine, and he just got himself and his company 1345 2016 certified, and he's damn proud of it. Tell us why you did that, Jose.
For us, because we're focused on medical device product development, the development that we do is under a quality management system that was designed to be compliant with ISO 1345. And what we found was that in some cases with potential clients or with new clients, the burden on them to qualify us as a supplier on their end could be reduced if we had the certification in place. And so, from a de-risking point of view for our clients, if they're evaluating multiple product development firms and they see that one already has ISO 1345 certification, it gives them a level of confidence that we'd be operating under a proper quality management system. Whereas if the company purports to have a QMS in place that's designed around that, but it's not certified, it creates a burden for them to then go in and qualify the vendor, the supplier, and kind of confirm that in fact the QMS does meet that. So for us, it was, it's partly a means of de-risking the choice for our clients, and then partly reducing the burden on them once we're engaged with them.
Jorg takes the other side of this very contentious debate. Tell the kind people at home what you do and why you feel the way you do.
So I've been in product development services business for most of my career. I currently run the business development and marketing for Omnica Corporation, a firm that's been in business 36 years. And I also have my own product development firm that utilizes engineering resources based in the Ukraine. And so that's my background. I've been in product development almost my entire career, so I've talked to hundreds and thousands of companies. The reason we have chosen not to do ISO 1345 is multifold, really. One is that it's obviously expensive to do. It takes a lot of energy and time and distraction for the company that we don't want. We feel like any process overhead that's added to the development of, the creative process of doing a new product development is going to slow it down. And so we kind of eschew all things process overhead that's unnecessary. The second thing is we're not the manufacturer, and the manufacturer is the one who needs to be the ISO certified body, because that's where the FDA will look if there's ever a problem with the product, etc. So the burden really isn't on us to be ISO 1345 certified. It's the burden is on our clients to have that certification. So we have just chosen, it's a choice, certainly. I don't think there's a right or wrong choice. Our choice has been to avoid the extra overhead of doing ISO 1345.
So I have two thoughts. One is, Jose, you're not a manufacturer either, so that argument.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, so ISO 1345 includes a variety of sections, if you will, that cover various things, from document management and document control to product development to risk management, and then to things like like manufacturing processes and all the like. And in fact, when you get ISO 1345, there's a scope certified. there's a scope that's defined within that certification. So for example, our ISO 1345 certification does not include manufacturing of finished medical devices. And as a result, when we're audited by the notified body or by third party that certifies us, we're not evaluated for things like manufacturing. The things that we're evaluated for are we using proper document controls? Are we using proper risk management? Are we using proper design controls? Are we following the portions of the standard that apply to the scope of what we do, which includes medical device, hardware development, software development, et cetera.
Let me stop you there just as a counterpoint then. Jorg, he's saying, well, 1345 is broad. We took this section, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the same section that would be relevant for Omnica, yes?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Design controls are absolutely required. These are things that are certainly required, and document control. However, we choose to place that burden on the client and not on us. So we provide the content. So certainly we're familiar with design controls. We understand everything that's required in that process, but we provide the content to our clients, and then they incorporate their design controls. Another reason is, if we were to do that in our own process, then it just has to be converted again into their process at some point, since they have their own quality system as well. So these are things that we've again, it's a choice.
Are you saying that your 1345 certification would be redundant if they have it?
Well, my point is, if you have design controls and you're creating documentation in a particular format, a particular style, the client eventually has to incorporate that into their own quality system. So they have to either copy it and translate it into their standard operating procedure formats and so on, and they're usually all different between companies. Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of rework there. I don't really know how much that is, but depends on how different their formats and things are compared to what we would establish for ourselves, for example.
This is where the ignorance of the moderator either helps or hurts.
It helps.
Because,
always helps.
Well, thanks. So I'm the manufacturer. I hire, either of you will have it, both of you will have a chance to answer this. And I show you my quality management system and the way we've done things in the past. Can't I just, for both of you, say, here's what we're doing. You are or aren't certified, but I want it to be like this.
Yes, and that's what they do, and that's what we provide them. But if you have your own quality management system that is storing information a certain way that's being audited, you have to maintain that as well. And so you're basically trying to maintain two systems, or you and your customer are trying to maintain two systems in parallel, which, again, it could be argued how much work that is. I'm not really familiar with how much work that really is.
Before I give you back to Jose, I want to ask, does the Jorg model requires that the manufacturer have its own certification?
Yes, definitely. The FDA requires that.
Does the obviate that need? Hey, don't worry about it. I'm certified, so you don't have to be, or they have to be anyhow?
Well, if I can interject for a second, certification is not required, actually. So FDA has its own guidelines, CFR 820, and ISO 1345 is the international standard, which is closely coupled to CFR 820. And it's actually not a requirement to have your quality management system certified in any case. It's not even for the CM. The certification functions as a means of having a third party evaluate your system, which gives you a certain level of assurance that you're compliant, so that when FDA does come to audit your system, it's unlikely that they'll have findings, right? So it isn't really a requirement for either. It's a means of having in place a record of having a third party having evaluated your quality management system and ensuring that it's compliant. In terms of, do you obviate the need for the client to have a system in place? So FDA is going to require that the manufacturer have a quality management system in place. But keep in mind that a quality management system, at the end of the day, is a compilation of dozens of standard operating procedures, primarily, right, in a quality manual and forms and records and those sorts of things. And depending on the scope of the work that an organization does, they would need more or fewer of them. So, for example, if you take the example, I don't know, GE, healthcare systems, or Philips, which does everything. They do specifications and design, they do product development, they do manufacturing. They effectively need the entirety of the quality management system requirements that are dictated by FDA. If instead you've got a smaller company, maybe a startup, and they know they're going to outsource product development and they know they're going to outsource manufacturing, the level of the number of SOPs that they need and the extent of their quality management system can be substantially reduced. And so, as an example, if they're not going to do product development themselves, a lot of the SOPs that are related to product development, they don't need to have in place. They'll need to have things like supplier qualifications, for example, because they'll need to qualify that supplier, and they'll need to have maybe things like post-market surveillance, because they're going to be the ones who are going to be selling the product and keeping track of it. But for the product development, they can have a very simple SOP that effectively says we rely on our product development partners and we evaluate them to ensure that they follow proper design controls. So you make their lives easier in those cases. So you're not going to completely eliminate their need to have some QMS in place, but you can reduce the burden of the level of complexity, which is more relevant for some types of companies than others.
We are, those of you watching this later, recording this live, broadcasting it on LinkedIn and other platforms simultaneously. If you have a position or question, this is a good time to ask. I can ask our fine panel of experts live, or you're welcome to leave a comment later on, and I'll direct them here to comment on them at the time. Jorg, do you tend to have, I'm wondering if the distinction is the size of the firm that you are servicing, because I imagine, but do not know, that startups are less likely to have established QMS systems in place, and therefore being able to just use Jose's ready to go system is a consideration when they're evaluating firms with which to work, whereas they might rule you out because you don't, or maybe you don't go that young as a company. But I mean, I know you personally, so I know that you advise people with concepts that haven't done anything yet. So
yeah, I think it depends on the stage of the company. Certainly, that's one aspect. And I should say also, in full disclosure, that there are companies that have chosen not to use our services because we were not ISO 13485 certified. We feel primarily because of lack of understanding of what that means, but nevertheless, there have been, that has, pardon, yeah, exactly. So that's fine, and we've managed to survive 36 years quite well without it. But I think, yeah, sorry. But it is, it is true that smaller companies, for example, if you're doing just a proof of concept, or you're not going to, you're really not even close to getting a product to market, you may not even need any quality things right at the beginning, design controls, etc. So it really it does depend on the stage. Very mature companies have all their own quality systems, as Jose mentioned, and therefore feeding into their quality system is actually quite simple, and they are going to store all that information and track it anyway because they have a full-blown, all aspects of the quality system in place. So it does depend somewhat.
Let me ask this. You mentioned early, and I've been good enough to remember to ask it now, and that is that you mentioned that one of the arguments for not having it is, oh, it's burdensome, and anything that adds burden and overhead and blah, blah, blah. And while I understand that argument, I'm thinking, isn't that like a more or less a one-time hit? Like once you go through the work, and I know that regulations are breathing documents and there are requirements and you keep up with things, but once you do it the first time, don't you just like have the badge Yep, I took that course. I got my credits, and now you can, because if you had it, there would be no
just
upside now, right? Just upside.
well, I don't know. I mean,
improve
I've had it before. I've gone through the process before with a previous company, and the answer is it actually, at least in my perspective, and again, this is not the only perspective. I think it actually becomes more burdensome because not only to get it the first time is one thing, but when you get audited or you get reviewed again, it's more difficult because now you have to have all the records, you have to prove that you've been following it. You know, the first time is having it, that's the easier one. The proving that you've been following it can sometimes be a little more difficult because you have to have all the records and the proof that you've actually been doing it as you claim you were going to do it. And again, that relies a lot on management. I think Jose's probably, that's not a problem, and he would probably have an easier time. But many companies struggle with the annual review more than they do with the initial thing. But the reason I said that, though, just to get back to it, is that our objective is to keep engineers here a long time and to be as creative as possible with solutions and as fast as possible with solutions. That's what we believe our clients pay us for. And the more overhead that you have involved in that process, the less fun it is for the engineering talent, the engineering staff. They like to do the creative stuff. And so this way of doing it has fit our business model better, in the way that by keeping our engineers happy, keeping them engaged, and keeping them for a long time, and that has really benefited the company long term. But that's why I said that.
Jose, are you thinking to yourself, I've made a huge mistake?
No, I don't think he's made a mistake.
No, I totally get what Jorg is saying. As an engineer myself, I recognize that there is burden. I mean, look, there's burden in developing medical devices, right? That's just, you can't escape it. And the question is who carries that burden? You know, our approach to it is, first and foremost, because all three partners are engineers in my firm, and the majority of our team is engineers, we recognize that. And in fact, our director of quality assurance and regulatory affairs, when I talk to her about this sort of thing, I said, your number one job is to make sure that we're compliant while we're reducing the burden on the engineers as much as possible, right? So anytime you're coming up with a new procedure or making a modification or training or anything else, your mentality always has to be, how do I make this as you know, it's actually a concept within FDA, as least burdensome as possible to the engineering team. And so what that means for us is that we've invested quite a bit of energy and capital in developing our system to be very streamlined and to make it pretty easy for the engineering team. And it's something that we're constantly evaluating and improving, because that burden is going to be carried by somebody. And if we kind of bring it back to specifics, like what does it mean? It's not an infinite number of things. What are you doing for document controls? What are you doing for document approvals? And then in the design controls, it's like, requirements, architectures, design specifications, test records, all those sorts of things. They have to be created by somebody, and the right people to do those are the engineers who are going to be developing the product. You don't want the client to have to put together the design specification or the software architecture document or the test protocols or the test records, right? That kind of has to be done by the design team. So it's a question of, will they be doing that using the protocols and the SOPs that the client has in place, or the ones that the company has in place? And I'm going to argue that it's actually less burdensome for the product development firm to have the SOPs in place and to sort of agree with the client early on in the process that they will be for doing these sorts of things, we're going to be using the bold type SOPs and forms, right? And because they're certified, there's not a lot of pushback on that. What does that do? It means that as an engineer, if you're creating a requirement specification document, you're using the same form that you've used a dozen times. That's a lot less burdensome than saying, okay, now I got to figure out how the firm does it, what their process is, and I have to operate under their process to create this document. So in some respects, I would argue having your own quality management system in place and your own SOPs reduces that burden for your engineering team.
Now,
I think I think you could certainly look at that way. I don't think that, like I said, I don't think either way is wrong. I think that like you said at the beginning of your comment, was we negotiate that with our clients ahead of time, as do we negotiate this with our clients ahead of time. So that's what, again, it's all about, in our business as a service business, it's all about customer expectation management, right? And making sure that we're delivering what we say we're going to deliver, et cetera, and in the time frame that we're going to deliver it. So
our MDG premium buddy, Jeff Gable, just wrote in a comment. Jose, can you see it and read it out loud, or shall I read it to you?
I don't
Read
see
it to you.
I can't see it.
Jeff asks, Jose, have you had to write your own QMS form? Pardon me. Have you had to write your own QMS from scratch to achieve the desired streamlinedness? Or have you been able to piece it together from off-the-shelf components with possibly some light customization on top?
So yes, right. The QMS.
It's a yes or no question.
I know, but I'll get there. The QMS, as we mentioned earlier, is a compilation of a lot of standard operating procedures and then a quality manual that sits on top of that, and some forms and templates around that. So when we started developing ours, and it's only about 3.5 years ago, you typically start with some generic off-the-shelf forms that you get from somewhere, right? We've got the benefit of having a director of quality assurance and regulatory affairs who's been in the industry for a couple of decades and has a lot of experience. And so, Jackie Hauge, she's amazing. She's awesome.
There you go. Shout out to Jackie.
Shout out to Jackie, yeah. And so we started with, a framework, right? From the beginning, we had to go into it and evaluate it and go, okay, does this work for us? Does this not work for us? There's some flexibility, right? So whether it's CFR 20 or whether it's ISO 1345, which are fairly well harmonized, they actually don't prescribe things to a very detailed level. And that has pros and cons, right? The benefit of that is that it gives you flexibility to employ systems and processes that fit your organization and the type of work that you do better. The downside is that sometimes it creates some ambiguity and you're not quite sure what FDA expects or what they want. But, that's why you have people on the team who are experienced and have had that interaction for a while. So, the short answer is that it's been a combination of taking some stuff that's been, in the ether for a while, processes that people on the team have access to, and then refining it over time. And that's part of another one of these concepts that FDA looks at is continual improvement or continuous improvement. And that's something that we take very seriously. Every project that we do, we're evaluating and going, was this more burdensome than it really needed to be? Was it sufficient? Did we not do something that really we should have been doing? And, there is effort associated with that. Part of what we do too, though, is we try to shield the majority of the team from a lot of the burden. So there's kind of a core team that is more steeped in the regulations and understands them well, and creates these processes so they're easy to follow by engineers, and then creates a lot of the documentation. So in a team of 35 engineers, there's really only 5, 6, 7 people who are very familiar with the standards and with the very specific elements of the QMS, and the rest of the team has sufficient training to understand the basics, and then is guided as to the content that needs to go in some of these documents.
Jackie's title is what?
She's a director of quality assurance and regulatory affairs.
And Jorg, I imagine you have someone with a similar role there, even though their responsibilities are different?
Yes, we have Catherine Kokolka, who is our regulatory person. Her job really is to harmonize and coordinate between our clients and us to make sure that their quality systems are receiving the information in the way that works for them. So we do have someone that does that, yes.
Well, you may appreciate that as a host, I'm all about the ratings and the eyeball. I need there to be a bit more of a death match, kind of a quienes más macho. Is it Bohorquez or your Lorscheider?
And
your Lorscheider. ¿Quién es más macho? Jose, you speak Spanish. Make your pitch. We're going off the air soon. Let people know why they gotta go with a 1345 certified development firm like yours.
Yeah, no, I think, look, as Jorg said, and I agree.
Fight.
No.
You can run an effective product development firm under either scenario. And, as Jorg says, like, it's a matter of setting up expectations with the client and figuring out who's going to be doing what at the outset. I think in the end, from the client's point of view, they do benefit from having the assurance that the firm that they're working with, first off, has processes in place that are compliant. Secondly, understands the process well. And third, in many cases, particularly you talked about some of them like earlier stage companies that maybe don't have a full-fledged QMS in place. Maybe they're even establishing theirs while they're developing the system. They can focus on just the handful of SOPs that they need and really lean on the product development firm for the other ones that they don't have in place, because maybe they don't do any product development in SOPs, just like they would lean on their contract manufacturer to have their quality management system in place for manufacturing. And in fact, I kind of view product development as being maybe 20 years behind manufacturing from the point of view of how it's being adopted as the right way to go. So here's what I mean. 20, 30 years ago, a lot of companies were manufacturing their own stuff. And at some point they realized, it's better to work with contract manufacturers who specialize in this. It's the reason why somebody like Apple works with a Foxconn. And in the medical space, the same is true. I think more and more that's happening in the development side of things, where a lot of medical device companies are realizing, our specialty and the thing that makes us special is not necessarily the development and the engineering, but a lot of the other stuff, the sales and marketing and understanding the end user extremely well, those sorts of things. And they're starting to transfer that burden or that effort over to partners like ours and yours. And in that model, just like in the manufacturing model, it makes sense for the manufacturer to be certified in their respective ISO 1345 sections. On the product development side, it makes sense for the product development firm to be certified in the sections that are relevant.
Jorg, he makes a compelling argument. I'm inclined to say that Jorge is the victor. What have you got to say about that?
Well, you haven't even given me a shot yet. What are you talking about?
No, I'm just saying you have quite a straw man to knock down there.
Well, okay. Well, two things. I wanted to also say to his comment is that it also depends on what kind of company you're running yourself, right? If you're a company, and I had a company before this also, that plans on growing, it plans on being much bigger, plans on being sold one day, I think that's also an argument to have certification, because it's part of the kind of the infrastructure that you would want to sell to somebody. And we're less inclined to look at that because we've been this size for 30 years, so we don't really.
And you're privately held, and you're happy to be that way forever.
Right. So that's one difference. I would say though that to sum it up though, I would say anything that gets away, and I have a book that I would recommend people read. It's called Orbiting the Giant Hairball. If you've never heard of that title, it's probably easy to find on Amazon. It's an interesting book about how to manage people, creative people. And managing creative people is different than managing other types of people. So for us, speed in our industry, or at least my experience of our industry, is speed is the factor. Everything is about time. It's not about money. It's not about anything else. It's about speed. And
let me interject. He told us Jackie basically handles all that stuff, and the engineers do what it is you're saying.
Well, but there's still a lot of overhead that went on to create the system, to manage the system, to maintain the system, to get recertified, to do all that sort of stuff. Anything that gets in the way of the speed any kind of process is always going to slow down your organization in some way or another.
And I know I'm eating into your battle time, but Jose, he's brought up this idea of cost and overhead and burden a couple times now.
Yeah.
In your view, how much cost, overhead, and burden have you added to your processes by having this thing in place?
I would actually, I would argue that we reduce both cost and time, because it's a medical device, right? The stuff has to be there, right? You have to follow design controls. You have to have these things in place. So it's a question of who's doing it and under what system. And I would argue that if a team is operating under a system they're very familiar with, they can be more efficient than if they're having to adapt to a new system every time they have a new client. In terms of the additional overhead just for certification, that's something that, again, in a team of about 35 people, we have one person that's dedicated to ensuring that we're maintaining compliance, and she's probably dedicating, less than 20% of her time specifically for the certification. Now that's separate from ensuring that we're being compliant to the standards, but you just have to, if you're a medical device, you just have to do that no matter what, because at some point, somebody's going to get audited, and you need to make sure that you've got the proper documentation and records in place.
One of you is gaslighting me with alternative facts, and I'm not smart enough to know which of you it is. So
well, I would have to say I disagree. But again, we have different perspectives in different organizations.
And only one of you can be right.
No, not necessarily. I think we could both be right. But I feel like, we do a lot of things to get that information without doing additional work. So as an example, we're giving weekly reports anyway to our clients. We put those in a format, we PDF it, we track it. There's a design history record, for example. We provide extremely detailed invoices. So we try to duplicate exactly what was done at what time, by whom, across, on our invoices in such detail that actually some of our clients have used our invoices as part of their design history record. So it's just, I think it's a question of approach, and obviously we've both been very successful in getting products developed, and so I think it's an open question. We can do it the way you want to do it. I personally wouldn't invest the money in doing it right now, because it does cost money.
So Luis writes, speed is the gaslighting. I don't know what he means, so maybe he'll clarify. Earlier he wrote, CFR addresses minimum, he underscores minimum. The FDA is looking for your QMS to address risk in all the processes. And Luis is a retired FDA freelance consultant. So his point is that CFR is really just the bare minimum. I'm not sure how that feeds into your arguments, but you're welcome to have at it. And if you have a comment on speed is the gaslighting, have at that.
I don't know that I quite understand what he means by speed is the gaslighting, but I will say I agree 100% with Jorg that speed is really critical. And it's something that we actually pride ourselves. Most clients that we work with are usually amazed at how fast we go. And they tell us that. They're like, well, you guys go a lot faster than people we've worked with in the past or when we've done it internally. And that does require work. That does require an investment. Jorg is not wrong in saying that it requires both capital and energy, particularly on the leadership side, to set the system in place so that it runs fast, right? And so it's a matter of cost-benefit analysis from the firm's point of view, and then cost-benefit analysis from the client's point of view. And I think the value is probably greater for younger companies that don't have a fully fleshed out QMS and want to lean on their partner for that, versus a firm that's very established. And maybe, if a client, this hasn't happened to us, but if a client came to us and said, hey, we need you to operate, it's very nice, you've got ISO 13485 certification, all these great processes, but we want you to operate under our SOPs because that's how we want to operate. And we had to do that. Obviously, there's a lot less value for that type of engagement that we have our own system in place that's certified. So there are going to be situations where there's minimal benefit, but even in those situations, I would say there's very little downside to having it. It's just, it doesn't have a value, but it doesn't hurt either.
Let me make an administrative note. I just put the link to join the live broadcast in the comments, which I rarely do, because Luis writes more, and I'd like to invite him to join us for clarity. So, Luis, if you like, and you're set up to do so, and you're not naked, welcome to take that link and join us live on this call. He adds, you must have a QMS when R&D changes to design controls. This is an area FDA looks at. I'm not sure how that feeds into his gaslighting argument, but perhaps one of the gentlemen.
When you start getting into version control, absolutely. We're usually doing a lot of product development prior to that version control on the electromechanical side. Jose is obviously more software driven, so that's a little different, but that's true.
Yes, Jeff, there will be. In fact, this is being recorded and shared, and you can take the link associated with this right now, and it will be permanent. We may or may not be waiting for Luis. I'm not sure. In the meanwhile, my friend Randall May is on, and he writes, is the issue certification or the actions necessary to achieve an outcome? And while you ponder that, I'm going to let Elliot out of this room. Who's going to
Go ahead, Jose.
Is the issue certification well, as we discussed a little bit earlier, certification is not a requirement from FDA's point of view. Certification functions as a means of assuring a third party that you've got a compliant quality management system in place. At the end of the day, what FDA is going to care about when they come to audit you is that you followed appropriate processes, that you have a system in place, and that you followed that system, and that system is compliant with the regulation. So those three things have to be in place. So the certification just serves as a means of having a third party evaluate your system and ensure that you're maintaining compliance, to give you more assurances that when FDA comes to do their audit, you're in good shape.
Yeah, the thing is, the FDA is not going to come to me. It's not going to come to Jose. They're going to come to you, the manufacturer, and you have to prove that you've been following a process. So that's really the bottom line. We're not the ones who benefit from the product being put in production, so we're not going to be the ones responsible for whether everything was followed. The company is going to be the one. So that's how we look at it.
Randall asks, what % of certifications do you see as totally useless?
I'm not sure if he means being certified in a variety of things.
No, I think he means this issue of 1345. And I think it's probably more of a Jorg question, since you are pro and he is anti.
I don't think it's I don't think it's useless at all. I think it
well, it sounds redundant in the case where you have a client that has their own.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's useless. I mean, it's not useless to them. It's certainly useful.
No, it's useless for you to have your own if you have to use theirs. Yours is rendered useless, or so I think your argument goes.
Yeah, I don't feel like we need to have the certification in order to be effective to do the job. However, so in that sense, I would say it's useless to us, if you want to use that word. I wouldn't call the specifications and the requirements of 13485 useless.
Mm-hmm.
They are quite useful,
Mm-hmm.
and there are a lot of people who who benefit from them, especially the patients at the other end, when things are made in a quality way, and they're assured of that quality. So and mistakes still happen, as we know. So this is why it's certainly not useless.
We are going to shortly come up to around 45 minutes, which is about as much as anyone can sit through.
Can stomach.
Yeah. So let me, for my benefit, because you both appreciate that I like little sound bites that I can get my head around, and I leave this conversation where I started as, I don't know. So you both made arguments for and against. There doesn't seem to be a right or a wrong answer. So I will instead, as your marketing strategy friend, ask you to frame it in a way that viewers can figure out which is right for them. So let me set it up this way. I'll ask you, Jose, you should choose a 1345 certified medical device product development firm if you
want to have assurances up front that the firm has a quality management system in place that is effective and is compliant with ISO 1345 and by extension FDA's CFRA 20. And if you want to reduce your own burden to qualify that partner as a supplier to you, because your supplier qualification process is probably a lot more efficient for a partner that has ISO 1345 certification versus one that doesn't.
Okay. Now, Jorg, I will say, you can ignore that's not a good way to say it. You don't need to have 1345 certification as a consideration in your selection of a medical device product development firm if you
have the confidence that they can do the job. That's really the bottom line. I mean, it's not a requirement. It's something that that I think, you know, is different for different companies and different stages, as we've discussed. But we would say that, you know, we can work in the absolute most streamlined fashion and get things done quickly relative to what other people can do that have too much, I wouldn't say too much, that have a lot of quality management overhead.
As your marketing friend, I need to give you that answer sucked because
yeah, I know,
because you said you don't need it if you're confident they can do the job. And I'm thinking, hey, look, everybody, I have this certificate on my wall substantiating claims that I can do this job, whereas you have a barren wall. So wouldn't I be more confident if they had it? And therefore you have shot yourself in the debate foot.
In a vacuum, yes, that's correct. But, you know, you have to look at their body of work. You have to look at all the other things. You make the decision you make is based on not whether they have ISO or don't have ISO. The decision you make is based on what have they done in the past, have they been successful, etc.
I'm thinking that if I'm the chief decision maker at the firm, and I put someone on the assignment to go find a suitable product development partner, I might make as a constraint, make sure you choose a 1345 certified
that's correct
partner. And Jorg would say, well, that's only because they don't know any better.
Well, that's happened. I mean, it's happened to us. They made it a constraint, and we didn't win that job. We didn't even get considered for that job. So that has happened.
You believe that again, it just is a business, a value proposition for your company as a marketer. You think that the incremental costs associated with having it, keeping it up, burnout, not as fun, all the things you mentioned, are less than the forsaken revenue and opportunity to work with firms on interesting projects.
Absolutely. Because if that's a primary concern, what that's going to tell you is the client is also going to be extremely process focused. Process focused means the project's not going to go very fast. It's going to move more slowly. They're going to have all kinds of requirements, going to make them difficult to work with. So I would say no.
So you actually see it as a benefit in helping you weed out clients you don't want.
Correct.
Wow. Talk about turnabout at the last minute. That was pretty. Jose, how do you reply?
No, look, I think any service provider, I mean, you know this, Joke, because I know you have a similar criteria. There are companies that early on you get signals that maybe I don't want to work with this client. Maybe it's going to be a great client. And it kind of boils down to company culture and some of the objectives of the organization, as Jorg mentioned earlier, where, if that's been a strong signal for them in the past, that this is a company I don't want to work with, then that's fine. But for us, we actually, we love working with startups as an example, right? Like young, fast companies that are really innovative stuff, trying to go into the future. For those companies, the reason that they'll be looking for ISO 13485 is not because they're super process driven, but precisely because they don't want the burden of the process, and they want to find a partner who can carry that burden. And so for us, I don't want to be losing the really fun, exciting, innovative products because the client, values that certification, because it tells them that we're going to be helping them with that burden.
Administratively, for a moment, I had planned to wrap, but Randall just keeps saying smart things. So Randy, if you like, 5 comments above your last comment is a link. If, similar to my last invitation, if you are dressed and would like to come on camera and talk to these educated gentlemen with your perspectives, I welcome you to do that. Luis didn't take me up on that invite, so I will assume you won't and read what you've said, but you are welcome to join us. Randy writes, personally, I see little added value to certification, provided the activities comply with applicable regulatory requirements. And he later wrote, wow, how does that comply with pre-production design requirements of ISO 13485? Now, I'm not sure whether that is because of the lag between his asking and my having rambled, but perhaps he will join us. So the question he raises is about pre-production design requirements. Oh, and here he is. So I will have him join us and tell us what he means. He later wrote, hey, funny seeing you here today. Welcome.
Hello, Randall.
Hello.
He is waving and his microphone is not yet. There he is. He's asking and my having.
My mic should be working.
You're going to want to silence. This is about pre-production design. You're watching. So that's the reason. I will have him join us and tell us what he means.
Great. Just to add in, I'm not sure if the audio is well, but the issue that I've found is this, is there are many companies who want an ISO 13485 certificate, and they end up literally contracting with some certification body who has a lead auditor that's incompetent. So go to India or many of the third world areas and look at ISO 13485.
Randy, I need you to shut off the sound on your computer. It won't silence you. It'll silence the feedback. How about now? Oh, no, you've silenced yourself. I'm looking for you to silence the playback of your speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're having some technical difficulties. But perhaps you caught most of it.
I think I got enough where I can at least provide some filler. I think the point maybe that Randall was trying to make was that you do have instances when an organization goes and gets third-party certified by an incompetent third-party certifier, and then what's the meaning of it, right? So, and maybe that could be a counter argument that if you're relying on this third-party certification and it turns out to not be all that effective, then maybe you get a false sense of security as to the competence of the partner that you're bringing on board, based on somebody else's evaluation, and it's not that effective. I mean, that's certainly a possibility, right? But if you're trying to de-risk a decision, right? If you're in the client's shoes and they're trying to de-risk the decision, it's certainly more likely that a company has an effective quality management system that's compliant if they have a third-party certification from a well-regarded body than if they don't, right? And so does that still leave the potential issue of somebody having a garbage QMS in place who just kind of snuck by an auditor who wasn't very good? I mean, yeah, but you're going to have corner cases like that.
Your comment?
Yeah, I think I've seen examples of what Randall's talking about, and it's also why I brought up the issue of, getting the certificate is actually easier than maintaining the certificate, because, getting it says, okay, I got all these processes in place, but once you've been audited, subsequent audits, you have to prove that you've actually been following the process, and you've got to have all the quality records and so forth. And so you actually have to change the culture of your organization when you do this. And if you don't succeed in doing that, your certificate's not going to mean a whole lot.
And
but
you're bringing up the issue of culture again, which is the way you weed out clients with whom you'd rather not work. So I think that's my biggest takeaway. That one little nugget was like the divider for me. It looks as though Randall's got the sound under control. Did you want to ask something, Randall? No, now you muted yourself. Undo whatever you just did.
There you are.
Yeah, so I do think I have the audio problem sorted. Somebody told me to stop the LinkedIn
Perfect
aspect. But anyway, what I've been doing, I've worked in Australia, I've worked in China, I've worked in Europe, in the U.S. for the last 25 years on primarily ophthalmic medical devices, and I tell you, I have seen companies who use ISO 13485 as a tick the box basis to qualify vendors in pre-production design or human clinical trials or production controls. And I've seen many lead auditors that are completely incompetent. So I can give you a very short story here about a company that I've previously was involved with who they came to me after they had lost their ISO 13485 certificate. And this is a finished, both a contract manufacturer and a finished device manufacturer, US based. And they had an ISO 13485 certificate for more than 10 years. And they never validated a production process, never controlled a document, never qualified a vendor. So essentially a lead auditor comes in every year and drinks some coffee and goes out to eat and issues a report, and that goes wherever it goes, and a certificate shows up. That to me informs me that there's a major problem, and I've seen that in India. My bet is if you went to India today and you looked took a random sample of 100 medical device ISO 13485 registration certificates and pulled on the string, my suspicion is maybe 5 of them might be substantially compliant. Most of them aren't. So some people implement a system and they meet the requirements of the standard and they're not certified. And that's great. Other people implement the requirements of the 13485 standard and other regs like 21 CFR 820 in the US, and they are certified. So what's important is the activities. So it takes one woman 9 months to give birth. You can't redefine that process. So the design process consisting of inputs, outputs, verification, validation, and transfer, all done to plan, but with some controls placed around that. It's if you do that and you're not certified, in my view, no worries. If you do that and you are certified, great, all the better. So my original question was, what's the difference? The marginal added value. So if you're dealing with a company that just wants to tick a box, gee, I can qualify this supplier because they have a certificate. That's dangerous. And again, I've had people come to me over the last 25 years, before ISO 9001, 2003 was around even, that's always wanted to tick a box. What do we need to do to get to market? What do we need to do to stay on market? So anyway, I'll shut up, and hopefully I've helped the conversation.
That's great. Thank you, Randall.
Yep. Boys, anything to comment on that?
Well, I'll just make the comment that I think Randall makes a very good point, and it's certainly not. I wouldn't imply otherwise. it should not be a sufficient criteria, right? Does this company have ISO 13485 certification? I mean, like one of the things that I think is really important, for example, is what does this company specialize in? You know, there's a reason that we're not a medical device product development firm. We're a product development firm that specializes in connected wireless medical devices. You know, I think for prospective clients, if I was, you know, looking for a partner to help me develop a connected wireless medical device, you know, we're a really good fit for them. And so that criteria is important. I think the criteria of coming in and having conversations with the leadership team, with engineers, with understanding what that relationship is going to be like is really important. And I think at the end of the day, anybody who's in the medical devices space has to understand at least the basics of these quality management systems and should know fairly quickly if this product development firm really follows their processes or doesn't. You know, just like Jorg said, like they provide weekly updates to their clients. We're the same way. And it's, you know, it's important to show and maintain accountability with your client and show them that you are not just delivering good engineering stuff, but that you're following the appropriate process and develop and generating the appropriate documentation that'll make part of that design history file when it's all said and done. So it's not sufficient, but it's helpful.
Yeah. Joe, you're muted.
Randy got me started.
Well, I don't know if I have any comment. I think, like
That's
anything, there are people who take advantage of a certification process and people who don't. There are a lot of companies that don't, you know, really, they feel like, okay, I need it for a marketing purpose, and only a marketing purpose, and then they don't change the culture, as I talked about earlier, to actually follow the processes and so on. And those kinds of companies you probably don't want to work with anyway. But so,
Randy, is there anything you'd like to add, or I'll send you back out to the audience?
No, you can send me back out to the audience. Good conversation, folks.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Randall.
So yeah, I actually worked with a company that got their 1345 certification, and we're excited to market it on their website. Jose, do you know anyone like that? And did it change your culture at all? I don't imagine it did.
Well, it didn't change our culture because our culture was already aligned with ISO 1345 process, right? That's the difference, I would say, is that it's not like all of a sudden the day you get certified, you have a QMS in place. In fact, you have to have had a QMS in place and you have to have operated under it in order to pass any, you know, quality certification process, because they as part of that audit, to qualify you, they're looking at your SOPs and they're looking at evidence that you followed your SOPs. This is the thing that Jorg said earlier. You do have to continue to work. It's not like, okay, we're done, now we can stop following these processes, because you have scheduled and unscheduled audits that come down the pike. So you have to build that mindset into the culture from the beginning. I think the balancing act that's really important, and it's one that Jorg also mentioned earlier, is building your systems and your processes and everything like that so that you can attract and retain really good creative engineers while still operating under a quality management system. And that does require quite a bit of effort and investment from the leadership team to make sure that you make your system efficient, you know, least burdensome, but still compliant.
That's really the key. I think, you know, Jose, few companies that I know have leaders like you that actually take on the process and drive it. What tends to happen is CEOs say, oh yeah, we want to be ISO 13485. They give it to some lower level person in the hierarchy, go make that happen. But it's not really a directive from the top that we're going to implement this and we're going to do it. And that's where the problems start happening.
I really enjoyed this hour. I knew I would. I have the gift of having smart friends, so I don't really have to think about things like this. God bless you if you have stayed the entire hour and watched all of this. And your reward will be a closing sentence from each gentleman about their firm, what they do, and when you should call them. Jose first.
You know, as I mentioned earlier, so we're a medical device product development firm that specializes in connected wireless medical devices. We love innovation, but we also take quality very seriously, and love to work with you if you've got that kind of project. But I'll also say that knowing Jorg, I know they have a very quality organization as well, and I'm certain that not having ISO 13485 certification should not be a limiting factor to engaging a partner like that as well.
Very generous. Jorg?
Thank you, Jose. I'll pay you later. Omnica has been, in business 36 years. We've done a lot of projects. We're located in Southern California. Jose is located in Florida. I do notice that there is quite a geographic component to this business as well.
What is that?
I don't know what it is. People like to be close to where their products are being developed. It just kind of, it's a human nature thing. It's not a.
Jose, do you find the same? A nod will do.
We have 0 clients in Florida.
Interesting.
All of our clients are spread out. But
Good.
I'm sure they love it if we're closer, but it hasn't been an issue for us.
Great. So in any case, we, long history of working on electromechanical systems and in vitro diagnostics and in medical devices, and certainly see all the information on the website. So yeah, if we can share, or look at us both for the same project and then compare you can compare the approaches.
Okay. Well, next up on Hage Debates, Republicans versus Democrats. Who is right and who is wrong? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Joe Hage on behalf of Joe Hage. See you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.